Today we're diving deep into what one source claims is a hidden technological system. We're going to conduct a kind of forensic analysis using a document that says it has mapped out the entire thing, what it calls an architecture of invasion.
Right from the jump, you can tell the source material is not messing around. It opens with this really powerful statement, setting this serious investigative tone. The whole point is to get past the what-ifs and present what it calls a clear, evidence-based blueprint for a massive surveillance system.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to look at the framework they use for their evidence. This is the foundation for the whole thing. Then we'll get into the system's three main functions: how it reads the world, how it models us, and then how it writes outcomes. We'll also dig into how something this big could possibly stay hidden in plain sight. And we'll wrap up with the source's big idea for a defense, this concept of cognitive sovereignty.
All right, first things first, the unseen blueprint. Before we even touch on the wild tech stuff, we absolutely have to understand how the source builds its case. Its entire argument rests on a really strict, verifiable way of looking at evidence.
This right here, this is the core of their method. Every single claim we're about to talk about is backed up by at least one of these four pillars. You've got P1 corporate patents, which show the blueprints and what companies are planning. P2 government programs, which reveal what they want to do and where the money's going. P3 is peer-reviewed academic research, the hard science. And finally, P4, legal and court records, which the source says proves this stuff is actually being used in the real world. This is the framework they use to keep everything grounded.
Okay, so now let's actually see this framework in action. We'll start with the read function, basically the system's eyes and ears. According to this document, the sensing starts with the phone in your pocket, but, and this is key, it extends way beyond that into the very environment around you. And the source draws a really important line in the sand here. On one hand, you have device-based sensing, right? Your phone, your smartwatch, stuff that's actively capturing your biometrics. But then there's this other idea, environmental sensing, which is way more passive and, they allege, can turn a whole room into one giant sensor.
And this is a perfect example of what they're talking about. The source points to something called Wi-Fi Channel State Information, or CSI. Now, P3 academic research shows this tech lets Wi-Fi signals basically act like radar. I mean, they can detect your breathing and movement right through alls. But here's the kicker, the P2 proof. A new standard, IEEE 802.11bf, is making this an official built-in feature of Wi-Fi. It's not a bug. It's becoming the point.
So, this system is just hoovering up these enormous mountains of raw data. But data by itself is just noise, right? How does it actually make sense of it all? Well, that brings us to the second pillar, the model function. This is all about turning raw data into real understanding.
Let's use a really simple example to see what I mean. A sensor picks up that your heart rate is high. So, are you on a treadmill or are you terrified of something? See, on its own, that single piece of biometric data is ambiguous. It needs context.
And this is how the source claims the system gets rid of that ambiguity. It's called data fusion. So, that first sensor, it just sees arousal from the high heart rate. But then a second sensor detects a proxy for cortisol, which points to stress. And a third sensor nails down your location. You're at a protest. You see? By fusing these separate streams together, the system makes an interpretation. This isn't exercise, it's fear or agitation. The ambiguity is just gone.
And the ultimate goal of this model layer is to create something the source calls the digital twin. Now, this isn't a static profile like on social media. No, this is a dynamic, constantly updating simulation of you designed not just to predict what you'll do next, but to get ahead of it, to preempt your behavior.
Which, of course, leads us to the final and frankly most unsettling function the source alleges, the write function. This is where the system supposedly moves from just passively predicting things to actively influencing and controlling them.
The source identifies three main levers of control, or actuators. First is economic, using things like programmable money that can literally control what you can and can't buy. Second is psychological, pointing to research on directed energy that could influence mood. And the third, the most direct, is neural, highlighting real government programs like DARPA's N3, which is working on non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. These are the tools the system would allegedly use to write new outcomes.
And to back up that economic claim, the source points to this P2 level proof. Project Hamilton, it's a real partnership between the U.S. Federal Reserve and MIT, is openly building a platform for a programmable CBDC. The key word you really need to hear is programmable. That means money that can come with strings attached, with rules and conditions coded right into it. So a totally natural question pops up here, right? I mean, if a system this enormous really exists,
How on earth is it not front-page news every single day? The source actually dedicates a whole section to this question, calling it the architecture of obfuscation.
It claims the main tactic is this three-step playable called strategic conflation. First, you identify a real verifiable threat or fact. Step 2, you use algorithms to amplify some totally fringe, unrelated narrative and glue it to the real story. And then, step 3, you dismiss the original verifiable threat by saying it's part of that fringe conspiracy theory. You basically poison the well.
And the source uses the whole public debate around Havana syndrome as its main case study for this. It points out that one government-backed report found pulsed RF energy was a plausible cause. But then a separate NIH report later came out saying there was no evidence of brain injury. Now, the source argues these two findings don't actually contradict each other, but the second report was widely used to dismiss the first, creating a ton of confusion and basically shutting down the entire conversation.
So after laying out this entire, pretty intimidating architecture, where does that leave us? Well, the source moves into its final section, a more philosophical take on what it calls the only real defense, reclaiming our cognitive sovereignty.
It frames this whole struggle as a battle between two big ideas. On one side, you've got the digital twin, the version of you that is perfectly understood, perfectly predictable, and perfectly machine-readable. And on the other side, the source puts forward this idea of the unmodeled self, which is the fundamental right to have parts of your inner life just be your own, uncaptured, unmeasured, unquantified.
And that brings us to the core concept of their whole defense. The source defines cognitive sovereignty as our fundamental, inalienable right to an existence that is free from this kind of constant technological scrutiny, the right to be free from systems that want to monitor, predict, and ultimately influence what's going on inside our own heads. Ultimately, after going through this entire analysis, we're left with a really profound question to think about. In this age of total sensing and predictive power, is our basic right to a private inner life being systematically turned into just another stream of exploitable data? That's the challenge the source material wants us to confront.